Hey, Fiends of the Pod, this is your host, Nate Wyckoff, and I want to remind you, go ahead and like and subscribe and check out cultandclassicfilms.com, where you can get cult movies exclusive to us with all sorts of extras like Pogs. We're supposed to call them milk caps. They're not Pogs. I don't know what Pogs are. Autographed posters, slipcovers, all sorts of neat things. You can also subscribe to have them delivered to your door every month at a discount. That is cultandclassicfilms.com. Remember, like, subscribe, comment, and refer to your friends, even your enemies. Every time you like and subscribe, we make sure Michael Cera makes another film. Yeah, that's right. It's us. Enjoy.
Welcome to Cult and Classic.
Welcome, friends of the pod and fiends of the pod. I'm your host, film critic, comedian Nate Wyckoff here today on my lonesome again, but there's a reason for that. I wanted to talk about this pair of classic films, which we started last week on our episode about 1950s Rio Grande with John Wayne by famed director John Ford. I wanted to talk about these from a critical film standpoint. And while we always have that in our panel discussions, I think it's really important to focus on themes, influence, and the overall effect that great classic movies like last week's Rio Grande and this week's 1955 feature East of Eden. I think it's important to look at these from a very analytical standpoint to understand how they affect contemporary film, specifically cult film, because we here at Cult and Classic Films love us some cult films. So last week I talked about Rio Grande. Depends who you ask. I am white, super white, so oftentimes we just call it Rio Grande. But Rio Grande, it was I called it a very conservative based film. The people involved were politically very conservative, and it's one of those movies that you would kind of expect John Wayne to make before things like True Grit and Rooster Cogburn, where his characters really, there's no gray area. The movie has good and bad, and good needs to fight against bad. It's more of like a moral stance than any sort of deeply thought, deeply felt emotional drive to it. And that is sort of John Ford as a director basically said the whole thing, every movie he ever made was just cashing a paycheck. It was just a job to him, which I think is talked about it last episode. I think it's ridiculous. I don't think that's the case. You wouldn't probably, I certainly wouldn't dedicate this much effort that he put into his career in the films if it were just my job. Don't think so. Don't think the person at CBS checking out my Red Bull and toilet paper is doing that either. But this week, we're talking about a very different beast, a really great pairing with Rio Grande. 5 years later, 1955, it is an adaptation of a John Steinbeck novel. John Steinbeck is a very famous novelist. He was a very famous novelist, and he wrote, probably his most famous work was Grapes of Wrath. And he also wrote Of Mice and Men. Really liked those multi-word titles. But no, it's very, very famed author, very heavy subjects, the kind of novels that you would maybe read in high school or first year, second year college that stick with you because they're depressing, but they're also full of sort of the angst of human life, as I would think of it. And so this movie, based off his novel East of Eden, is directed by a very excellent technical director by Elia Kazan. And again, I have never heard his name actually spoken. I've only read it. So apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, but who knows? Who listeners of Cult and Classic Films knows? So Kazan did this movie because, like his other films, he's quoted as saying, "I don't move unless I have some empathy with the basic theme," meaning I don't want to be involved in a feature if I don't have some sort of emotional connection, or if it doesn't have some sort of emotional impact and meaning to me, which is really sort of the antithesis of what John Ford said about crafting a movie for him, right? He said it's just a bing bang boom, do this so we can move on and I can get my paycheck. Whereas Kazan said, no, this is I only want to do things that really mean something to me. Personal and social issues are two words that are often brought up with his features. He's done an incredible amount of famous work. He did Marlon Brando's breakout role film with Streetcar Named Desire, Elizabeth Taylor, 1951. He did On the Waterfront from 1954, which I think is especially interesting right now. I'm sorry, Vivian Leigh as in Streetcar Named Desire, not um, not Elizabeth Taylor. That's the other Tennessee Williams adaptation, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. But Marlon Brando in the role in A Streetcar Named Desire, that began his really powerful career, and Kazan directed that. On the Waterfront from 1954, a year before East of Eden, is about a crooked union, as well as all sorts of things about unions, which certainly flavored, I think, at least in the United States, a sort of anti-union bias. It wasn't caused by On the Waterfront by any means, but it very much, the powerful elite in the states have certainly caused unions to be looked at with skepticism. That's not to say that there wasn't a lot of corruption in unions, and isn't probably still. Anytime you have people at the top who are in control of things like money and power, corruption will ensue. But I think especially right now in 2023 America, we have a lot of issues where workers are trying to unionize. I am, for example, a professor, and a lot of professors cannot unionize because there was a sneaky way that people who didn't want teachers to unionize basically had professors classified as managers, which means they can't unionize, or it's very difficult to unionize. So this On the Waterfront speaks to, I think, currently our life in America now. But this is about East of Eden, which actually speaks more, in my opinion, to our life now. And this is what's really fascinating. Rio Grande, which Warner Brothers Discovery has released a brand new 4K transfer of, and they've also done it for East of Eden, done it sort of as a pair. They're really, as I said, complete opposites, right? Rio Grande is about the strict black, white, good, bad. Here's just what you do. You just follow what you do, and you follow what's right, and what you're told is right is right. And it's very much exploded in a film like East of Eden, only 5 years later, which is about two brothers sort of struggling uh, to handle and ingratiate themselves to their really conservative, religious father. And the father is, the character's name is Adam Trask, played by Raymond Massey, very excellent actor. James Dean, as mentioned before, plays the son Cal, and then the role of Abra is played by Julie Harris, who is a love interest, sort of female uh, opposing role in the film. And then Richard Davalos plays Aaron Trask, which is the brother of James Dean's character. There's also a lot of amazing other people in there. Jo Van Fleet plays a strange mom to them, and BURL Ives is the sheriff. So there's lots of interesting acting choices in here. It's a very well acted film. I would say that Rio Grande also is well acted. I mean, that is, as much as I call it a very conservative, old school film, it is not. I mean, it was made in 1950, but that doesn't mean it has to hold to sort of ideals that we have sort of exploded in our contemporary culture and see as old fashioned, because they're not as nuanced as we now understand life and social pressures to be. East of Eden is very much in that emotional violence of life, of youth, of family relations, of frustration with life not being how it's supposed to be. In Rio Grande, things are as they supposed to be, and when you do them as you're supposed to, then that's when you get the rewards, right? And in East of Eden, there aren't always rewards. You cannot win all the time. So we have a very passionate, a violent performance by James Dean, who many times had some sort of breakdown on set or in his trailer. This was his first big feature role, and he would sort of there's rumors that he hid, and would cry and need somebody to help him. Um, and Elia Kazan, the director, basically was said to have waited, just wait uh, for James Dean to sort of come back around, and then continue with filming. I think the idea is that this really added to the character because as Steinbeck is reported to have said when he met James Dean, he is Cal, like he is a the actual personification of this character, very moody, very hot and cold, really angry, but also that complicated combination that a child has with a parent who's either distant or abusive, where they want that affection and love so much that it drives and colors their every behavior. And often when you don't get that, right, it becomes this sort of uh, really fiery Molotov cocktail that can explode. James Dean is now called sometimes a method actor, and supposedly he would really get on Raymond Massey's nerves off camera to heighten the tension between the two characters. I'm gonna maybe call. I'm gonna be skeptical of this because James Dean's life outside of the film is not necessarily uh, out of line with his character. So while it may be true, I don't really know how James Dean um, interacted, other than the fact that Raymond Massey and he did not get along. Raymond Massey famously did not enjoy working with James Dean. Other actors felt similarly, but at the same time, his female foil in this, played by Julie Harris, had a lot of respect for him and really worked to sort of allow him the explosive violence that he brought to the character without finding it, or at least saying that she found it really upsetting or hurt the performance. If anything, everyone agreed, despite the frustrations with James Dean and his personal struggles on and off set, they really said that it made the film better. And it's one of those cases where they're absolutely right, because James Dean's raw nerve. I mean, if you've seen Rebel Without a Cause and you haven't seen this, and you think that his performance in Rebel Without a Cause is that sort of like angry teen, angsty, I mean, it is, but compared to East of Eden, it is small potatoes. I mean, really, it's like call I would this is exaggeration, but I would be like, it's like looking at Marlon Brando's performance in Godfather compared to his performance in Streetcar Named Desire. They're a little different, right? Like both of them have gravitas, but Streetcar Brando is a sexual violent powerhouse, and Brando in Godfather is a much more muted, powerful, in control character. I'm not saying that uh, the latter refers to Dean's role in Rebel Without a Cause by any stretch, but the difference in intensity is certainly there. So, East of Eden, there are, it's a family drama. Here's what's crazy about East of Eden to me, as a viewer who certainly wasn't alive at the time that it came out in 1955, is it's a solid 2 hours, and it is not just it's a tense 2 hours. A big part of it is actually James Dean's look. He has this way where he looks from under his forehead, like he bends forward, he looks up through his eyebrows, and it makes him very untrustworthy. You just cannot, which is perfect for the role, because you can't tell exactly what's going to happen from scene to scene with him. We also had, as I mentioned, um, Julie Harris, who is, I think cult fans will probably know her from The Haunting from 1963. She played Eleanor in that movie, Eleanor Lance. And I mean, the cast and the crew is pretty crazy. Paul Osborne wrote the script from the Steinbeck novel, and Osborne was he died in 1988. He was born in 1981, so I mean 1901. So he had a fairly long life, but he wrote so many things, so many television scripts, especially things like The World of Susie Wong, Wild River, the movies. But most famously, I think he wrote this, but then he also wrote 1958 South Pacific, which is by far, I would say, the most well-known of the South Pacific um, filmic interpretations. So he definitely has uh, had established himself at this time. But by the same token, I think today he's not particularly well known, unless people are, and like several of those people who are really into 50s drama, sort of grandiose musical, that kind of thing. So, but he did a very good job in this, a very literary job, which is appropriate for the novel that it's based on. BURL Ives is goofy. I mean, I don't think you could do anything other. I'm not saying it's bad, but it does add a really um, interesting vibe to see him in here as a sheriff. Uh, Here's something that I've mentioned how sort of I feel like this movie is the very it resonates really well with America right now. As someone in my late 30s here, most of us are not making the money that we feel like we were promised through college and other things. You know, we're strapped with debt, student loans, underpaying jobs, all sorts of things. I mean, the wealthy, and I don't just mean the even people who are a millionaire, the billionaires especially, they're really trying to hold this level of power that is um, truly wild over the country. And to assume that someone who could buy a country is such as studio heads who are waiting for actors and writers to lose their homes, lose their apartments because of their unwillingness to pay really what isn't even enough for what the creatives that make their content do. We're talking the writer strikes, the SAG strike, the union crew strikes, the special effects artist strikes. These things are all tied together with this sort of disenfranchisement with the America that we feel has not materialized for us. And East of Eden is all about that lack of what we need, what we expect. Cal and his brother, they really cannot get from their father what they want. And then, spoiler alert, there's revealed that their mother is alive and just estranged. Estranged is a pretty big deal. But then the entire fabric of their belief system within their family just collapses. It's ripped apart, and it's sort of the violent outburst then that Dean's character exhibits so well is this kind of pushback, not even a pushback. It's a free fall in desperation, because if everything you've been working for is shown to be unattainable, and you have no alternative thought out, you have no other path, then there's just this hopelessness. And depending on who you are and where you are in that journey to discovery that shatters your worldview, you're going to either collapse or lash out, right? So in that way, I feel like East of Eden is very much a good parallel to the what is often called not often, but sometimes called the liberal viewpoint of life in America right now, and being a working or trying to work individual who's unable to even contemplate retirement. Not even a fraction of mind can be given to that when you're so far in debt, as so many of us are. But East of Eden, in that way, it is just a radical departure from the films of John Ford and Rio Grande a mere 5 years earlier, right? So this movie, violent, intense, full of this seething anger, and also this childlike, desperate desire to be loved and appreciated, and have someone be proud of you. It is not. It is sort of unrequited, right? Any sort of resolution is still somehow unfulfilling. It is not fulfilling in what you're looking for. So this is really not just a parallel of our times now, but it's very influential to films now because East of Eden has, I mean, Stanley Kubrick, by the way, said that director Elia Kazan was the greatest American filmmaker, and this movie is stunning, as is Streetcar Named Desire, and I really think that I can see strong parallels between Kubrick and Kazan because the shots are deliberate, and there's always a focus on some sort of delivering not just an emotion in the scene, but delivering an emotional message to the viewer, right? There's a difference between watching someone be emotional and being ourselves, becoming emotional because of what we're seeing. That identification, whether it's in a horror movie, the terror, or whether in a romance, the desire. These things really affect the viewer when we don't just understand what's happening on screen and see what the characters are going through, but we're pulled into a place where we don't always even want to be, with that character, right? We're literally with them and their emotions, our reactions and our emotions that come from those reactions are the same as the character on screen. It's not even that we're seeing their reactions and feeling what they're feeling. We're actually reacting to their situations as they are. And that's the success of being able to really make a viewer connect and lose themselves in a scene. And when your scenes are focused on emotion, it's going to be the characters that are causing that. Okay, so that's the highbrow, high level idea of how this movie East of Eden really informs contemporary cinema here in the US, and I would argue beyond, but for sure we can say here in the US. As I noted, Stanley Kubrick was a great admirer of Kazan's films, but here's where cult films come in. Okay, there is a level of sort of melodramatic randomness that occurs in East of Eden and many dramas like this, especially at the time. And we talked about Rebel Without a Cause, and that is one of the greatest examples of extreme melodrama. It is actually beyond reality, right? If you actually watch it now, you can certainly lose yourself in the film and it becomes very engaging. But also, you can logically think about it and realize that it is beyond Romeo and Juliet being young people in love and killing themselves over the loss of each other, right? It's actually this, like kids flying off the handle because X, Y, and Z is stressful, right? Growing up is hard, and yes, they also have familial issues as the characters in East of Eden do, but so do we all. I'm not saying that one person's reaction is right or wrong, or one person should be able to handle something another can't. But the melodrama comes from overacting, over emoting, making things more dramatic. That's why it's melodrama. It's more extreme, more over the top than one might expect. And when you have that level, sort of you're running, instead of running at a 5 and then, peaking at 10, you're running at an 8, and your peaks of 10 may not be as far, but you don't have anywhere else to go. You can think of another really great example of melodrama. I think my favorite example is Mommy Dearest, right? Faye Dunaway's portrayal of Joan is so truly wildly insane on occasion. The hatcheting the tree, no wire hangers. These things are famous because they are so over the top. The scenery is chewed. There was not a crown molding or a door frame that didn't have teeth marks all over it in Mommy Dearest. And in some ways, Rebel Without a Cause is similar. East of Eden has that, I would say, to a smaller level, but it is a melodrama. So when you look at those things, I think of another really famous cult melodrama, and people will sort of, I think, be stunned. The Room. Tommy Wiseau's The Room, which is one of the most famous cult films to have come out of the last decade, or 2 decades really, of American cult cinema, is insane because there's very little logic. from scene to scene, plot point to plot point. The arc of the story is really unclear. We know what happens, but we don't really know what the driving force was. But what we do see are characters having really random explosions uh, of emotion and energy. The acting may not always be on par with what's supposed to be taking place, but that randomness, that high level of um, discomfort that comes with not knowing what's coming next, it comes out in sort of a fun, joyful way in the room because it's so crazy to us. Like, the Tommy Wiseau's characters do things without clear motive, but it also is a little uncomfortable because you just don't know what's going to happen. And that is, as a mammal, as an animal in general that has some sort of instinctual desire for safety, for for calm, dependability, reliability, routine. Those things are bucked when you have these melodramatic films because you don't know how far it's going to escalate, and you can't always judge when these explosions of emotion are going to occur. And The Room is a fantastic example of that. So if you ever hear of a cult film that's a drama, chances are it is an extreme melodrama. And if you think that you haven't seen a cult melodrama, I'm sure you've seen The Room, but if you think you haven't, guess what? Every one of the cult films that you've watched, especially slasher films or detective, thrillers or erotic thrillers that you've seen, those play heavily off melodrama. Because don't think of the slasher part, right? The murder scenes, etc. Think of what they end up building as the character stories around those murders. That is melodrama. That is, it's rare to see a cult film that has a deep, soft, quiet, nuanced level. I had a writing instructor, very well known editor of literary magazines, in particular, as well as a writer, say that the climax of your novel it could be as vast as an explosion or loud as an explosion, or as soft as the exhale of a sleeping baby, right? And so what happens is what he means is this all about the meaning and the meaning that the audience derives from that moment. Okay, that they apply that moment to the rest of the film or story, and that's what they get. That's a very nuanced, very difficult to attain uh, element of film, or novels, etc., but especially in a film, that's hard to get. It takes a lot of things lining up, a great script, you know, um, scenes, lighting, technology that doesn't that doesn't detract rather from the focal events of the scene, and great acting. Right, it's really hard to carry a seriousness, and without stating what's happening openly and directly, as these films prefer not to do, these nuanced films. It's very hard to do that without someone who can really act, put the emotion into their role without having it bleed across the screen or explode across the screen. It takes effort. It takes restraint that generally someone who isn't well practiced in acting isn't gonna they're not going to be able to attain it. Now, I'm sure there are geniuses that can do it from day one, but that's not most of us, right? So cult films don't have all of those things often, especially low budget cult films. They do not have necessarily the strongest actors, right? Oftentimes, especially in some of our favorites, ultra low budget films, they're just friends. They don't even consider themselves actors, right? So when you have a cult film and you don't have the technical excellence because you don't have the money, you don't have the maybe you don't have the cinematography as crisp as these other more nuanced films, these films that can afford to strive for that quiet uh, quiet climax, right? You don't have that because you can't rely on all the things around it that make that happen. You can't rely on those things to be effective enough. So what do? You turn to melodrama, because melodrama has that crazy, elastic, wild energy that you can get away with even if you don't have the strongest acting cast, even if your camera angle is bonkers, even, how many cult movies, low budget movies have we seen where it's clear the camera is just sitting on top of someone's car roof across the street? Right. I mean, look for it. You'll see it everywhere now. And that's the kind of thing that you do it as a filmmaker because it's quick and effective. Like it does the job, the dirty, quick job. May not be perfect. It may not even be level, but it's there, right? You're capturing the scene on film. And when your actors can't necessarily deliver a line in a very nuanced, I'm using that word a lot, but it's very important. When they can't do it necessarily, or they can't regularly do it, they're not experienced enough, then you have to have something there to engage viewers that you can attain. And that's that crazy melodrama. It's why characters often shout out. It's often a character will have a breakup with their partner before a scene, or they will have a violent screaming match, or they'll have somebody else will have the violent screaming match, and then our lead character will have like the cold shoulder reaction, which is a very powerful thing in melodrama as well, because you're paralleling this violent force with this immovable calm force. You see that most often when the tough guy leaves the prostitute with a heart of gold, right? She's like, "Don't go, I don't want you to," and he's like, "Meh, meh, meh, meh," that's my impression of that character. Blah, 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 blah. So we see these things and they're melodrama and they surround the cult films that we love, right? The slasher flicks, we even see it a lot in like a dollar bin science fiction film, right? Because these things, we don't have the money, we don't have the available resources all the time to do a Terminator Salvation McGee film, right, where it's just nothing but wall to wall special effects. We don't have that as cult low budget filmmakers, so we have to find a way to make every scene engaging to get our audience to the next scene where we do have the budget to do what we want. We can do the decapitation, right? We can do the vampire reveal. We can do the super sexy striptease scene. Like those are the things that we know the audiences are going to like, and we have to keep them engaged through the stuff that we have to put around it, right? It doesn't mean that all cult movies have sort of cliched framing stories or scenes that are meant to just basically manipulate the viewer to hang around, but that's kind of the deal, right? And it's not just cult films. Big budget movies, especially poorly constructed action films, have this too, right? I mean, look at the Fast and the Furious movies. And hey, there's a lot of cast members in Fast and Furious that I love, but they're not high thinking films. They don't really need to be, but everything around the action scenes is completely unnecessary. It's just filler until you get to the next big moment. And so we need those fillers when we're low budget working on film, or rather working on low budget films. We need those to be engaging, and melodrama is how we do it. So that's how East of Eden feeds into sort of our modern understanding of cult films, or rather our modern version of cult films. Okay, you will see this everywhere, especially those shot on video films from the late 80s all the way through the 90s, even to the 2000s. You get melodrama everywhere. Blair Witch, you have melodrama. I would argue that there's plenty of nuanced, understated stress as well, but melodrama is certainly there, especially in the big fight moments. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. Do I recommend East of Eden? Well, of course I do. I recommend East of Eden and Rio Grande. They're both very beautifully done films. For my preference, I guess it would depend on my mood, right? If I want an old classic Western, pre-spaghetti Western, right? We talked about that last week. It doesn't have the grittiness really of a spaghetti Western. If we want something like that, then Rio Grande is an excellent example. It's sort of actually the epitome of that kind of safe black and white, good, bad movie. And it is quite beautifully shot. It certainly is beautifully shot. And East of Eden then is the real powerhouse for me. It's a strong melodrama. It speaks to our contemporary frustration with the society that we find ourselves in, the failure of the infrastructure that we have around us purportedly to help us live and thrive, the failure of that to do so, and the realization that um, those people managing an infrastructure like that, whether it's our elected officials or multi-billionaires or our parents, when those things fail, the world that we have expected and become safe in falls apart for us. We have to reevaluate and rebuild everything. And that can be a very difficult, very frustrating, angering, and depressing time. And East of Eden speaks to that. It's basically the whole film is it speaks to that. So check it out, especially if you're feeling frustrated with the world and you need to be cathartic about getting some of that out so you can hit the picket lines. Check out East of Eden from 1955. If you don't like, quote unquote, I don't like old movies, first off, stop saying that. Go back, watch the movies. There are movies that literally could have been filmed today, all the way back to the 40s, probably even the 30s, right? So you can really see them. If you think that classic cinema doesn't have anything to interest cult sensibilities, hopefully these 2 episodes have changed your mind. And if not, make sure you've watched Sunset Boulevard. I mean, it almost, like, right near the opening, they're having a funeral for a pet monkey. Like, it's wild banana stuff. So you may not think that you're interested in old films if you're really interested in cult movies, especially horror movies, but that's just not the case. You just haven't looked closely enough. So it's a whole, thousands upon thousands of movies to dive into that you may not have experienced. And as you watch them, you're going to find those kernels of the cult films and the low budget indie films that you love sprinkled throughout these. So thank you so much. If you're listening in August of 2023, make sure you go to cultandclassicfilms.com and sign up for our newsletter, because it puts you in the running to win 4K digital copies of Rio Grande and East of Eden. So you can get both these films that I talked about on this pair of episodes for absolutely free. All you got to do is sign up for the newsletter, and we have a lot of copies to give away. So there's a really good chance that you will get these, and they are stunning. They have never looked better. The 4K is pretty wildly good for these movies. So go ahead, sign up, cultofclassicfilms.com/newsletter. And thank you so much. As always, we'll play us out with the chud, but make sure you like and subscribe wherever you watch this. If you listen, go and write a review for us wherever you get your podcasts. And check out our Patreon at patreon.com/cultandclassicfilms, because we have exclusive cult films, really awesome, insanely low budget, weird films that we send to you every month right to your door in regular or super special collector's edition movie versions with POG, signed posters, all sorts of stuff. Prices are great. Check it out. You won't want to miss this, because these titles are really hard to find. Some of them are literally not available. So check it out and enjoy. Thanks so much. We'll catch you next week with a brand new pairing of Cult and Classic Films. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.